St. Louis. So when we look at a person that we could bring forth to talk about where we've been, we're going, we felt that it was none other than Hank Weber to help kick this forum off. For those of you who might have ideas of other state, we're all ears. Let us know. You can post it in the chat. You can reach out to Matthew, or you can certainly email me. But without further ado, please join me in welcoming into our midst none other than Hank Weber. Hank?
Thank you very much, Yemi. Thank you for that very kind introduction. I'd also like to urge everyone to attend What's Right with the Region. I think I've made 12 of the 13 or 11 of the 13 since I've been in St. Louis, and they're powerful, uplifting affairs that really point out the best that's happening in our region. My topic today is St. Louis, where we are and where we are going. I bring several perspectives to this presentation. First is quite personal. I and my family have come to love St. Louis after moving here 13 years ago. This is our home. This is where we plan to grow old. I love the architecture, the walkability, the generosity and friendliness of our people, Forest Park, and the Cardinals. And it was great to be at a baseball game myself this weekend in person. The commitment of so many of you, to many in the region, to do the right thing, including so many of you in this virtual presentation today. Thank you for joining me and your continuing commitment to the St. Louis region. I have also, for well over 20 years, written and taught about cities in America, particularly about the redevelopment of challenged urban neighborhoods. For the past several years, I have led a study of the comparative success on measures of growth and equity of Midwestern cities in the United States. I bring the perspective from that research to the table. I am not, on the other hand, someone who has struggled personally with the challenges of our region. Hearing from those perspectives for those who live in our less privileged neighborhoods and face greater challenges is very important as well. St. Louis is a region of great strengths, many of which are why so many of us love living here. But I also recognize that we are not where we want to be as a region, that we have not always answered to our better selves, that we are a place where the great promise of the American dream, the promise of equality of opportunity for all, has not been achieved. We have done much that is good and right, but there are mountains left to move. Our challenges are threefold. First, the St. Louis region is growing far too slowly. It is not that we are not growing, but that we are growing very slowly. We grew about 5% in population in the region in the last 20 years, while the United States grew at 15%. Most regions are growing far more quickly than St. Louis. Look at this chart for a minute. It is the population of the top 20 metropolitan areas in the United States, ranked by population since 1970. We were 10th in 1970, we were 20th in 2010, and we will likely be 21st in 2020. In 1970, Atlanta was half the size of St. Louis. It is now well over twice as large. Slow population growth makes a region less attractive for company relocations, airplane flights, and upwardly mobile people. Growth creates opportunity. Second is a lack of social mobility. America was founded on the opportunity, on the belief that all children have the opportunity to be successful. There are many ways to measure equality of opportunity. The most rigorous is work by Raj Chetty and his colleagues at Harvard University. They have looked at the relative likelihood in every metro region of the country of a child who grew up in a poor family moving to being in the upper fifth of the income distribution. So they've looked at kids who started in the bottom fifth of the income distribution and moved to the top fifth. Top fifth doesn't mean you're rich, but it certainly means you're comfortable. St. Louis was 42nd out of the 50 regions on this measure. Our record in promoting social mobility and helping people move up has much to be desired. And third and most important, perhaps, is our lack of racial equity. If you go to look at the next slide, you'll see the difference in income by race in America. And those differences are huge. The average African-American per capita income in America is $22,237. The average white per capita income is $38,717. These differences are huge in the United States, in the St. Louis region, and in the city of St. Louis. But unfortunately, and that is a national problem. But there is a particular local challenge because the gap is even bigger here. And it's bigger here in the region because African American income is lower than the national mean, about 10% lower. And it is particularly acute in the city of St. Louis, where I live. Moreover, neither the country nor St. Louis, and where our lack of progress is somewhat more acute than the country, is making progress at closing the income gap. Between 2000 and 2018, the income gap between whites and blacks population in our region actually grew by 15%. My father and mother were completely dedicated to the civil rights movement, along with their family and a commitment to progressive Judaism. It was what defined their lives. And I think they're gone now. They would both be over 100. But I think they would be pretty disappointed that this is where we are 50 years after the Civil Rights Act and the Fair Housing Act. And I join their view. The gaps in income are mirrored by gaps in health outcomes. In the city of St. Louis, the rate of years lost to premature death is astonishing. For whites, we're a little over the national average. For blacks, the city is over twice the national average. And the same statistics show up for many other social outcomes. Please recognize that I purposefully omitted other races from this data. That is because demographically, St. Louis is predominantly a black-white region. But I do want to acknowledge the region's growing numbers of Hispanic, Asian, and mixed race populations, something I view as very positive. A region that is more diverse in the 21st century will, I believe, be most successful. These three trends are, of course, not independent. The racial gaps in our region have made it harder to attract mobile human capital, making population growth more difficult. The young and skilled in particular want to live in diverse regions. None of what I have said suggests there are not great successes in St. Louis. We can see them every day. There are many, and they really matter. But we have major challenges we must face. Why are we where we are? There are many reasons, of course, but I would argue that three are most important. First is racism. Racism is a national tragedy, the original sin of America. But it is also profoundly affected by local decisions, by decisions we make in St. Louis. It is in St. Louis that we made land use decisions that allowed redlining and the creation of small municipal fiefdoms in order to discriminate against Black populations. Even today, we continue to make decisions that make affordable housing in wealthy suburbs impossible. In some suburbs, we refuse to make multifamily housing at all possible. It is in our state that we are very hesitant to expand Medicaid, denying an additional 200,000 of our citizens health insurance. It is our region that has not yet been able to develop a public safety system that protects the public and has broad support in all communities, particularly communities of color. We can make progress at addressing race and poverty locally, and I'm very optimistic that Mayor Tashara Jones will make progress on these issues. Second is economic change. St. Louis grew to be a great city because it was a manufacturing center and an inland port. We are one of those Midwestern cities that from very humble roots became a place of great opportunity due to manufacturing. The story of cities like St. Louis, Detroit, Milwaukee, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh was the story of the mastery of mass production of goods and mass production of beer, at least in the case of St. Louis and Milwaukee. Mass production, while providing great profits for owners, also allowed employees, including many African-American males, to build a middle-class life. And then it ended. Manufacturing moved to the suburbs, to the southern states of the United States, and then abroad. And productivity gains means that it takes fewer to produce goods for those firms that do remain. The base of the economies of North St. Louis City and many of the North County suburbs was manufacturing. The General Motors plant in North City, let us remember, employed over 10,000 people at its peak. When manufacturing declined, so did the neighborhoods around the plants. The decline of manufacturing is not just a St. Louis problem. This chart shows the decline of manufacturing employment in other Midwestern cities, and the trends are consistent. One of the reasons that all of these cities have struggled has been the challenge of replacing manufacturing jobs. Third is politics. St. Louis regional politics are very localized. Our core city of St. Louis is small relative to the region and not a member of St. Louis County. The city has today 28 aldermen for 300,000 people. Hopefully that will go down. St. Louis County has just under 100 municipalities, and the region spreads across 15 counties in 2 states. There are good things about decentralized government. It allows people to know their elected officials very well and have access to them. But it makes it very hard to generate the resources for government to respond to big challenges. And structural economic change and racism are big challenges. I do not believe it is an accident that 2 of the Midwestern cities that have been most successful in recent years, Indianapolis and Nashville, have regional governments and very strong regional civic organizations. I'm quite positive about the movement to create Greater St. Louis, Inc., giving us a regional civic organization. For many of you, this is familiar. You know our challenges. The question is, can we change? And if so, what do we need to do? I'm an urbanist. I write and think about cities much of the time. And if there is one lesson studying cities teaches you, it is that history is not destiny. I was born in 1957. For demographers, 1957 is famous as the largest birth cohort year in American history. We were the peak of the baby boom. For baseball fans, which maybe is the other characteristic of my family of origin I didn't mention earlier, however, 1957 was when the Brooklyn Dodgers moved to Los Angeles. Why? Because Brooklyn was dying. Manufacturing was sharply declining in New York, and the New York port was moving its center to New Jersey. Now Brooklyn is facing a challenge of much too much housing demand, leading to rapid gentrification. Chicago, once described only 25 years ago as the worst public school system in the United States by the then Secretary of Education, has made remarkable progress in increasing graduation rates, test scores, college attendance, and college completion. In St. Louis, Cortex has emerged as one of the most important urban innovation districts in the world. It has 6,200 jobs and 425 companies. And it was put together by a unique partnership of 3 universities, Washington University, the University of Missouri, St. Louis, and St. Louis University, the city of St. Louis, Barnes, BJC Healthcare, and the Botanical Garden. Under the leadership of Chancellor Civic, an even larger group of anchor institutions is joining together to look at purchasing and employment patterns in the region and what we can do more. A number of neighborhoods, perhaps most notably Forest Park Southeast, have rebounded to become mixed race, vibrant, walkable urban neighborhoods while preserving affordable housing options. If there is one model the region can learn from, it is Nashville. Nashville is not on the coast. It has the same weather as St. Louis. In terms of many categories of assets, including architecture and cultural attractions, St. Louis is a stronger region than Nashville. Both cities have an economy that has great strengths in education and healthcare. But Nashville, unlike St. Louis, has grown 35% in population since 2000, increased their per capita income for African Americans, and shrunk the income wage gap between the white and black populations. Nashville has been particularly successful at increasing their middle-class African American population. They too have a long way to go, but they're moving in the right direction. We have a challenge and we have an opportunity. The question is what to do. At a high level, we know where we need to go. We need inclusive growth to grow more quickly and make sure the benefits of that growth are equitable and don't repeat history. We also need to shrink and close the income gap between majority and minority populations. What does that mean in terms of programs, policies, and investment? I propose 4 areas of focus. 1, we need an all-out drive toward racial equality. Racial disparities, as I have noted, in St. Louis are very wide and not closing. Closing this gap is going to take very targeted efforts to improve supplier diversity among large institutions and corporations, affirmative training and hiring, and building stronger neighborhoods in areas of disinvestment. 2, We need to rebuild the core of the region. This means downtown St. Louis and the neighborhoods around downtown on both sides of the river. Great cities have great urban cores. There are almost no exceptions. This is no easy task in St. Louis. We're a region of many areas of strength. We need to gather more of that strength in the historic heart of the region and the place that is most accessible by public transportation to those who most need jobs. The need to rebuild the core was a major theme of the recent 2030 jobs plan, and it's the right thing to do. Third, we need to fight concentrated poverty. The effect growing up in concentrated poverty on the life chances of children has been well documented for 40 years. It was the basis of the seminal work of William Julius Wilson in the 1980s. The zip code where you live really does matter a great deal to your life chances. Unfortunately, St. Louis has among the largest areas of highly concentrated urban poverty in the country. The people of North and East St. Louis, particularly St. Louis, deserve better schools, safer streets, and affordable high-quality housing. And it matters to all of us. Stronger neighborhoods will lead to stronger streets and a stronger workforce. Fourth, it is time to embrace the new economy. Manufacturing, despite its decline, is still important for St. Louis, and we should do everything we can to support growth. And there are some areas of growth that are possible, but it cannot fuel the region. We must be the hub in geospatial and biosciences that we are in ag tech. We have great strength in these areas. Let's train and educate, starting with all of our fifth graders, to be ready to work with the new economy. That means every fifth grader in the Normandy School District is learning, understanding, and applying real-world technology, like every fifth grader in the Parkway School District. In order to make progress on any of these priorities, we are going to have to face our past and consider radical new ways of working together. The reality is that change will be hard and cause us to grow new muscles. It will require unusual partnerships between citizens and corporations, between grassroots community leaders, between policymakers and activists, and between anchor institutions and community members. My institution, Washington University in St. Louis, is under the leadership of our Chancellor, Andrew Martin, committed to being one of the partners to create inclusive growth. We will be in for St. Louis and with St. Louis, not just in St. Louis. That begins with dialogue and partnership. We have our ideas, our approaches, our thoughts, but so does each of you, and so do tens of thousands of our colleagues and friends in the region. The best ideas for creating a just and vibrant region and city will come from grappling together. Thank you, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions. So if you can put, what is the format for putting questions in? Can the moderator let me know?
If you put questions into the chat box, we can forward them to you. Or if you just want to raise your hand, we can call on you and you can open up your mic and ask directly. So the first question, Hank, is please share your perspective on the impact of state government on regional and local initiatives.
It is certainly true that state governments across the country vary in a variety of ways in their willingness to engage in providing financial or other kinds of support for localities. Missouri has tended not to be one of those states that is deeply engaged in those issues. Comparison would be Pennsylvania, for example, which is deeply engaged in urban issues. Governor under both Republican and Democratic issues. And I think that's something that the city and the region need to come together to make happen. That's going to require extraordinary work together between the Kansas City and St. Louis delegations, their suburbs, Springfield, Columbia, etc. But it has been a challenge.
Gail, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask.
Okay, I was just in the process of typing it in, but I guess my question, as I look at some of the neighborhoods in our Grove, Central West End, Forest Park, Southeast, and other communities, my question is, how do we integrate these communities for the benefit, these new communities north of Delmar, for the benefits that we're talking about in terms of growth and resources while maintaining its culture and minimizing gentrification?
So I believe that ironically, first of all, it begins with a process. It begins with the process of deep involvement with residents in helping to shape the future of their neighborhoods. And that is where successful neighborhood change begins. Second, I do believe that carefully planned neighborhood redevelopment can both make markets work again. So long-term homeowners, many people in North St. Louis, the north suburbs, have actually seen what for most middle class and working class Americans is their greatest source of wealth disappear, which is home value. It is their home value. Remember, financial assets are really limited to a relatively small slice of the population. While preserving options, by thinking at the front end, why preserving options for people who choose to stay. I think careful, proactive community planning, such as the work that Invest STL is doing with Cornerstone in the West End and can be done in other neighborhoods, can achieve that. Frankly, the fact that our population is not growing so very quickly, the fact that we don't have extraordinary growth creates less demand for rapid escalation. So I think it's doable, but it's only going to happen if people are thoughtful at the front end and address the mutual needs. Address the needs of making markets work again and preserving options for people. And I think that's our challenge. I think there are best practices around the country. I think we've done reasonably well at it in some parts of St. Louis, and I think it's doable.
Thank you.
What can young working professionals do to improve the region? You can get deeply involved in your neighborhoods, in organizations that you care about, and you cannot wait in line. What strikes me about St. Louis is that it's the negative, and I think some of your questions, the questions that are in, what some of the negatives are, we have not had the long-term, focused, deep involvement often through a very large foundation that you've seen in other cities. We don't have the kind of deep infrastructure for some of our kind of work. The plus is that you can create things, is that people can create things, and that leads to kinds of change. I see the rise of young groups like We Power. I see the rise in the influence on tax incentives of Team TIF that arose a few years ago. You see the ability. I think what's striking here is in St. Louis, if you can get 30 people to work together and focus on things, you can get attention. And frankly, I think that it is young people, particularly in the city. That's who's moving in. That's the demographics. It's going to be your city. And I would start thinking about what to do with that. So Alan Todd, the last question that just came in. When looking at other regions, what role did public education play? And what had Chicago done to improve? I know far more about Chicago because I spent, I know far more about Chicago because I spent 22 years there, and I was very involved in public education for the last 15 or so of those years. And I think what Chicago did was three things. One is the mayor of the city of Chicago organized the entire city to say, the future of our city depends on the success of the Chicago public schools and on our kids, even if you don't send your kids to the public schools. Because many elites, many institutional leaders in Chicago, as in St. Louis, either live in the suburbs or send their kids to private options. He created a culture that said, that's the future of our city. Second thing is he built, and it is a mayor-controlled school system, he built a very competent organization that could implement change at the local level. There was strong institutional support. And Arne Duncan, who later some of you know by name, became the Secretary of Education in the Obama administration, was the most visible person of that, but not the only one. There was a team. And the third thing that happened is the civic and higher education and institutional community got on board in important ways. The Public Education Fund raised tens of millions of dollars to support the public schools. Something called the Consortium on Chicago Schools was created, based at the University of Chicago, that brought the best researchers in the country together, many of whom located in Chicago, but not all, to look at questions like, where do kids who are dropping out of high school fall off the wagon? And are there things we can do to intervene at those points? Using really important methods. And they learned a lot. And they were implemented. And it's made a big difference. So I think it's those three things. What are the differences and similarities between Nashville and St. Louis? And what did they do? Well, I think there are some similarities. I think there are lessons. Every city is different. And every city has to find their own strategy. Nashville had some advantages. It is a state capital, and that means the connections between the state and local issues are stronger. And actually, a very important piece of scholarship by Manuel Pastor argues that cities that have less equity, greater equity by race, One of the characteristics is the state capital. The second thing it had is it never went through the decentralization of its downtown that we have gone through. While it was never as strong, wasn't always as strong as it is now, we didn't develop a second major business center in the same way. And third, Nashville put together a remarkably successful partnership between the convention business and a music industry, predominantly around country music, it should be said, and an industry where it became a very, very attractive place for people to come for a meeting for 3 days and go out to the honky tonks and do this. May not be something you want to do for the rest of your life, but it seems to work very well for a few days here. They also had a regional government. And my sense, and I had planned on making a multi-day trip to Nashville when I saw this data about 15 months ago, etc. And my sense is that they have been willing to have a strategy and stick with it. Well, another one of the questions says, in all of the many plans St. Louis has seemed to come and go, it seems to me, the step to implementation was not considered. There was no how. And then it mentions worries about the 2030 plan. I would say implementing regional change strategies are a 30-year proposition, and they require sticking with it for 30 years. And the region that has probably done this most consistently, most powerfully, is Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh had there's nobody except for Detroit who suffered more from manufacturing's decline than Pittsburgh. And while Pittsburgh still has its challenges, it has not arrested its population slide, but it's done great at increasing per capita income. Pittsburgh has had basically a 30-year process of rebuilding, which has been consistent, applied consistently, and operated. And I think that's what you need to do. Only two strategies of regional growth. Good plans with a broad base that are implemented over a long period of time, changed as the data comes in, etc. And second is remarkable luck. There is that possibility. Very famous book talks about why Seattle came back and says Seattle came back because Bill Gates moved Microsoft back when it had 15 employees from Albuquerque. Very few people know that Microsoft was located for an instant in Albuquerque. But you can't bet on luck. You need long-term plans. Very hard question after the very nice point of great thoughts. How can we go from strategies to action? It seems like we tend to get in our own way. Politics, fiefdoms. No one wants to embrace change for the sake of all. See better together, failed initiative. How do we get over this challenge? Look, I think that's a question for each and every one of us. Do we believe that the gains of working together, that the gains of working for things where the benefits are going to be for our children, not us, where the gains are going to be widely shared over time, are what we want to do or not? I'm reminded of a story, and when I was in Chicago, there was a series in the Chicago Tribune by Blair Kamen. He won a Pulitzer Prize for it, for 5 days, Above the Fold. And it was on the condition of the South Side lakefront compared to the North Side lakefront. And he pointed out that the North Side had all kinds of amenities, a zoo, beaches, marinas, and the South Side didn't. And that, oh, by the way, the North Side was predominantly white and the South Side was predominantly black. The mayor went a little crazy about some questions about the methods and whether it was exactly, the article was exactly fair. And then he figured out how to take a bunch of dollars, a couple of $100 million, and investing it in the South Side lakefront, creating a prairie, creating beaches, creating marinas. Went to the state legislature, got help. A great help to him was a state senator from Chicago who turned out to get a really good job in Washington, D.C. later on. And he said, you know, and what he did is, those are dollars that he could have spent on a lot of other things, or he could have lowered city property taxes, which, by the way, are dramatically higher than St. Louis property taxes. But he decided that over the long run, both fairness, letting South Side residents have access, letting kids have the same beaches to swim in and places to play as North Side kids, and creating a new amenity, which is making the lakefront great, would be good for the whole city. Politics allowed him to invest, and he cashed in a lot of chits. And I think that's how you make long-term plans. There's a question about what are your thoughts on the Better Together program? I believe that the region would be better off with a somewhat more centralized government. Whether that is the entry of the city into the county, whether that is emerging, I think all of this, I'm frankly not close enough to talk about. But I think the reality is, I'm not optimistic. I think these things I'm not optimistic with the failure of Better Together. So I think that means we need to come up with joint initiatives that really matter to the region. Responding to concentrated poverty, relinking the city back together again, improving public education, that cut across these bounds. I think while I would not prefer it, I think that we're going to have to learn from, for example, what I view as the very successful zoo museum tax, what I view as the very successful GRG, Great Rivers Greenway program, where we put together solutions that involve multiple partners and cut across the region. I'm very much hopeful that Greater St. Louis, Inc. will put together all of the corporate and business leadership in the region to support long-term investments. And I'm very pleased that they're leading the fight in Jefferson City to implement the will of the voters and get Medicaid approved. But I think it's going to have to be, unfortunately, things like that, like Cortex, where we and SLU and UMSL joined together, along with BJ and Garden. So I think it's going to take more one-off solutions. I wish that weren't true, but I think it's where we are. What's the role of civil society in driving growth or change in the region? Civil society is incredibly important. It's incredibly important for a region to say everybody matters. That the success of your kids is, if not quite as important as my kids' success, it's pretty damn close to that. It's incredibly important. It's a belief that we rise together or fall together, not in the short term, but in the long term. In the short term, there are often trade-offs between interests. Whether a company goes to Cortex or goes to downtown, it's a little better for Cortex or a little better for downtown. But the fact is that in the long term, what matters is that company stays in the region, preferably in the urban core of the region, and they grow. We at Cortex feel great about the fact that Stereo Texas is moving downtown to the Globe building. It's freeing up space in Cortex that we can use to incubate the next big company. We wouldn't feel great if they went to Dallas, 50,000. We wouldn't feel great if they went to New York, but they're staying in St. Louis. And that's the attitude we need to bring if we're going to make progress. It's hard. And I think it has to be rooted in personal relationships, in forums, and in conversation. Are there other questions? I want to look. Are there other questions?
Hank, there is a question that came in. They're asking if the impact of the current state of education in ability is it an ability to retain families in the region?
It is certainly true that, and then there's another question from Eric that I'd like to respond to. There's also a question about pilots in University City and the university, which I think is a little more specific, but I will respond to that offline. If you can send me an email, I'm glad to do that. hweber@woostel.edu or go into the university's website. So it is undoubtedly true that stronger educational options help draw people to neighborhoods and to places. It's hard to imagine. There are many reasons for the rebirth of Forest Park Southeast and Botanical Heights, but the growth of a very successful charter school there clearly is an important part. Important part of City Garden is an important part of that. If we could create more outstanding school options that are attractive to people, it would be enormously good. And it's particularly important to do that at the neighborhood level for elementary schools. Most places in the country, people have accepted that their kids might have to go across town to high school. But people still, in general, want strong elementary schools in their neighborhood. I think there are, and I think that I will give Superintendent Adams credit, and I will give the credit to some of our charter school operators, that we have more high quality elementary options than we had earlier, but there's a long way to go. And the problem, of course, in St. Louis is, and this is a big challenge to the city, is in big cities, they impose a big commuting tax if you work in the city. If you work downtown or at Cortex or in the Washington University Medical Campus, Those equivalents in the Chicagos or New Yorks of the world, if you want to live out in the suburbs, you commute an hour each way. That's not true in St. Louis. It's very easy to live elsewhere. Somebody asked what impact has COVID-19 had on progress in the region? If it has harmed progress, how do you see those progress resuming? COVID-19 has harmed almost everything that's good. I mean, there's no, and it has done, it's led to an empty out. It's been very tough for downtown. It's been very tough for local retail everywhere. I mean, the question really is how we rebuild from this, and can we build back better? But the pain has been very, very considerable. And the question is, how permanent are its effects in terms of, my own view is that it's going to create that people are going to be desperate to be back together before too long as they're vaccinated. And it's going to actually create opportunities, but it's challenging. Call came, what role can faith-based groups play in this effort? It seems to me that faith-based groups can play an enormous role by saying equality of opportunity is a fundamental tenet of almost every religious group in the region. That we have a commitment to help to provide a safety net and provide the opportunity, particularly for children, to thrive. That means access to the services that those of us who are economically blessed have available. Faith-based groups can say that it's absolutely not okay that you have to worry about paying your kids' healthcare bills. That's not a great example because of the way child Medicaid works, but the point holds. I think faith-based groups can provide a moral conscience. Many social movements have had at their heart, as did the civil rights movement, faith-based groups who said, we have a moral responsibility to do better, for all of us to do better. A lot of my own values are rooted in a faith tradition. So this is very close, and I see some of my colleagues who think about this on this call. Our job is to say, out of a faith tradition, is there are values about repairing the world, values about children's ability to thrive. And it begins values that say, there but for the grace of God go I. And you know what? Other people's kids deliver what I could give. And I think that is incredibly important as a kind of, I think that faith-based organizations, perhaps more than anybody else, can say to the body politic, religious leaders can say to their things, we have a responsibility to create a better world. That's why we're here. And so I think it's incredibly important. I guess it is 12:58, so I am going to return this to.
You can hand it back to me. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. And thank you for your questions.
Well, thank you very much, Hank. I think you summed it up in one of the previous questions that you answered, that at the end of the day, it has to be rooted in personal relationships. And for us to think about what is in the value for us that resonates with us. Now I'm looking at Michael O'Brien. You said we need an individual, someone with no hidden agenda, to step into that leadership void in this region. Preferably not a politician, someone who has the best interest of the region at heart. Michael, no pressure. Maybe it is you. We can all do this one person at a time, one relationship at a time. Thank you again for everyone for attending. If you had any thoughts about what our next state of the state should be, we are all ears. I'm going to hand it back to Matthew to close us out.
Thank you again for coming. Thank you, Hank. Thank you, Yami. I just want to say What's Right with the Region is coming up on May 13th. You can also save the date. Our next Focus on Diversity panel discussion is June 23rd from 12 to 1 o'clock. So stay tuned. There's lots of focus to come. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Okay, Amy, it's just us.